A very warm welcome to our workshop. My name is John and I will be your presenter. We're going to look at the topic understanding emotions, and I believe this is a very, very important topic to discuss. And why I feel the way that I do is, as someone coming from a very negative background, which I can only describe as emotionally deprived, where we were never really allowed to show emotions. We never experienced any kind of expression or demonstration of any warmth or love. And I actually have memories of at times getting a hiding and I wasn't allowed to cry. So that's what I mean by emotion deprived. So from a very young age, I learned to bottle up my emotions. I learned that it's not appropriate to show emotions or to feel emotions. And it was only later on in life that I discovered this. It's not really possible to suppress emotions permanently, because at some stage they're going to find or look for ways to express themselves, because that is the nature of emotions. They show up in various ways in our behavior, in our reaction to people, in our relationships. And it took me a long time to really, basically from scratch, learn what emotions were and how to deal with them and how to process them. So I really believe that tonight will be a very beneficial discussion. Emotions, ally or adversary, friend or foe. As I intimated, that many of us from a young age sort of learn to understand that it is not really acceptable to express emotions, and particularly in the Western world, and particularly for the male species in the Western world, the whole idea of big boys don't cry or cowboys don't cry. And it really causes major problems in later life, as I said, if a child from a young age is sort of conditioned to look at emotions as negative. And of course, what we also do is we tend to label some emotions as positive or good, and some emotions as negative or bad. And the good emotions we may be inclined to pursue, and the bad emotions we may be inclined to suppress. Our emotions are neither allies or adversaries, neither friends or foes. Emotions serve a very, very specific purpose in our lives on a daily basis, and we're going to look at what that purpose is. First of all, let's look at what emotions are. Now, that's almost like a duh question, because what are emotions? There are feelings, absolutely. But what causes emotions? What are those actual processes that take place within us that cause us to feel feelings or emotions? First of all, emotions are the result of the nervous system's biochemical response to my thoughts. Every single thought that I think, at some level, there is a biochemical response from my nervous system. If I think happy thoughts, my nervous system releases the so-called feel-good chemicals and I feel happy. If I think angry or sad thoughts, my nervous system releases various stress hormones and I feel either the sadness or the frustration. The situation, the event, or the person itself plays a relatively small part in my experience of my emotions. My emotions are the result of internal processes, the meaning-making and feeling-making process in how I interpret whatever it may be that I am observing. The second point, emotions are indicators of the quality of my thoughts. I mentioned a few minutes ago that there are no good emotions or bad emotions or positive emotions or negative emotions. Emotions are the indicators whether my thoughts are positive or negative, whether my thoughts are good or bad. My body simply responds, and as I said, emotions serve as the indicator of what is going on in my mind. The whole process of us actually starting to feel our emotions, the very basic core principle is core beliefs. In previous sessions, we've discussed pretty much in depth about our beliefs, but I just want to touch on them just for the sake of laying a foundation for today's discussion. Our beliefs are the ideas that we internalize from the time we were small, from the time we were born, basically, without questioning. Information that we received, instructions that we received, our parents' ideas and beliefs and values and morals that were imprinted on us as children. And this sort of caused us to think a certain way about certain things. And over time, those thought patterns became internalized as core beliefs. And the main core beliefs are beliefs about ourselves, how I see myself, positive or negative, our beliefs about others, again, positive or negative, and our beliefs about the future, positive or negative. And those particular beliefs determine our thoughts. Should a situation occur, should we encounter a circumstance, an event, immediately it triggers certain thoughts within us, certain meaning-making processes, the story that we tell ourselves. And the main cause of those thoughts will be the core beliefs that we developed from a very early age. Those thoughts in turn give rise to the feelings through the biochemical response within my nervous system. And those feelings in turn lead to my behavior, the way that I react, what I do as a result of how I feel. And that very often feeds back into the thoughts. So, for example, I'm thinking very sad thoughts about a situation. I'm feeling the sadness, I'm feeling the unhappiness. I now behave in a way that shows how I feel, and my behavior, my negative, maybe self-sabotaging behavior feed back into my thoughts, and I maintain the cycle. Negative thoughts produce stress hormones in the brain that impair cognitive functioning. Our brain consists of three main parts. The neocortex, which is basically the outside part of the brain, and particularly the frontal part of the brain. The limbic system, or the midbrain, which is the inner brain, and then the reptilian brain, which is in the back of the brain at the base. The neocortex, and in particular the prefrontal cortex, facilitates our executive functioning, our speech, our logic, our higher thinking skills, our questioning, our evaluation, our interpretation. The limbic system, or the inner brain, is where various structures are found that are responsible for the release of chemicals. And that is also where our beliefs are formed. And that part of the brain does not process information via language like the neocortex does. It processes information via feelings and memories and patterns. And then we have the reptilian brain, or the survival brain, where our programming for instinct or for survival is located. And that part of the brain doesn't think or doesn't feel, but it purely reacts to messages that it receives. So I may, for example, have what I interpret as a negative experience. So the neocortex gives the experience the meaning of negativity by the story that I tell myself. That triggers the limbic system, releasing various emotions. And those emotions trigger the reptilian brain that causes me to react in ways to protect myself or to survive. What a lot of people don't realize is that should there be a strong negative reaction in my brain, in other words, should there be a situation that trigger negative thinking, that trigger stress hormones in my brain and that trigger the reptilian brain for action, my prefrontal cortex in particular, in a way, goes offline. It stops functioning. And the reason for that is the brain has interpreted the situation as a threat, and there is no time to think. It needs to mobilize all the energy and all the focus onto the problem. So what literally happens is the blood supply to the prefrontal cortex gets reduced, and the prefrontal cortex, the function becomes impaired, so that I don't waste any time thinking, but so that I can react in order to protect myself.
When we hear the word emotion, most of us think of love, hate, happiness, or fear. those strong feelings we experience throughout life. Our emotions are the driving force behind many of our behaviors, helpful and unhelpful. Just where do our emotions come from? Our brain is wired to look for threats or rewards. If one is detected, the feeling region of the brain alerts us through the release of chemical messages. Emotions are the effect of these chemical messages traveling from our brain through the body. When our brain detects a potential threat, our brain releases the stress hormones adrenaline and cortisol, which prepare us for a fight or flight response. When we detect or experience something rewarding, such as someone doing something nice for you, our brain releases dopamine, oxytocin, or serotonin. These are the chemicals that make us feel good and motivate us to continue on the task or behavior. In these instances, the feeling region of the brain kicks in before the thinking part. Sometimes the reactions of the feeling brain are so strong that it dominates our behaviors and we're unable to think rationally in the moment. Our emotions hijack our brain. While many of our emotional responses happen subconsciously, our thinking can influence our emotions, and sometimes this can be unhelpful. Just thinking about something threatening can trigger an emotional response. This is where we can manage our emotions with conscious thinking. Our emotions play a powerful role in the way we experience the world. Understanding and regulating our emotions through our thoughts and behaviors can help us take greater control of our brain and achieve our goals.
An interesting fact is that we are evolutionary conditioned or predisposed towards negativity. In other words, there's a natural reaction where we first see threat before we see opportunity. We first see the problem before we think of a solution. Of course, that is all part of the conditioning for survival. Many generations ago, our forefathers faced a lot more natural dangers in the form of predators, wild animals than what we do today. So it is basically programmed into our DNA that our survival gets triggered. And if we're not aware of this, we will not use our prefrontal cortex or our logical thinking to first look and evaluate the situation, but the whole process goes straight to the midbrain and the reptilian brain that gets triggered with the associated emotions and chemical reactions, and then the behavior. So in order to understand emotions, it is really important to understand how they're caused, basically what we've been looking at, and then what we can do to process the emotions. What are the lessons we can learn from them? Another interesting fact about emotions is that unprocessed emotions can turn toxic in the body. How does that work? Emotions essentially are chemicals that are released in the body, endogenous chemicals, hormones, peptides, neurotransmitters. And if we are not able to process emotions, if we are not able to resolve emotions, what literally happens is those chemicals remain trapped in the body and they turn toxic, and they can be the cause of either physical or mental or emotional illnesses or disease. And that's quite an interesting fact and quite a scary thought. What makes it even more fascinating is that it's not only necessarily so-called negative thoughts or negative emotions that can cause toxicity in the body, but even the so-called positive emotions. If I can give an example about myself, I am a natural introvert. I tend to keep things to myself. I'm not naturally an expressive person. So therefore, I'm more inclined to keep my emotions hidden and not to express them or to process them. So whether I won $1 million in a competition or I won a movie ticket, I will probably react the same. And that means I also run the risk of toxic emotions or toxic chemicals being stored in my body as a result of a lack of processing the emotion. So that's an interesting fact to keep in mind. It is commonly known that the main cause of physical and mental illness is stress. And what is stress at the end of the day? Well, unresolved emotions. Is when I face a particular trigger over and over and over again, and I keep telling myself the same negative story, and I keep processing the situation as a problem, and I don't find a way to address it, to deal with it, and I don't find a way to resolve the emotions, I move into a place of stress. And stress causes, if I can put it this way, the entrapment of chemicals and hormones in my body that can become toxic and affect my health. We're going to look at what is referred to as core emotions. In other words, the most basic emotions that we all experience. And we're going to look at the fact that each and every emotion that we experience contains a twofold message. Each emotion tells us what the situation is, and should it be problematic, what the solution is. In other words, what is causing the emotion and what we can do in order to resolve the emotion. I'm going to repeat that every single emotion that we feel carries a twofold message. These are core emotions, meaning that all other feelings and emotions are sort of the result of these. So I'm just going to run through them quickly, and then we're going to look at each one individually and get a better idea of what the message is that each emotion relates to us. These particular emotions are in a particular order. And why I say that is that the further down this list we go, the more disempowering our state becomes. And the reason for that is that our narrative or our story or our meaning is becoming more and more negative, which means that the nervous system is releasing more and more stress hormones and a larger range of stress hormones, which impacts our emotions more and more. So let's take them all individually and see what each message is from each emotion.